Hi, everybody.
Hi,
From New York City, this is Christos.
and Foster.
And we'll keep going. You know, we want to thank you first for being so kind and supporting as much as you can. And, we need your support, otherwise, what's the point of all this? So it's really great that the numbers are high. And share, 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 subscribe, and like. I have to get this into my head. And today we want to talk a little bit about dimensions, time, and what it means to be on your path. I think that's an interesting idea because we always choose our themes according to what's going on right now in sessions or in workshops, what we hear about. And a consensus theme is very often: am I on my right path? Am I where I'm supposed to be? Am I who I'm supposed to be? Am I supposed? And there is this preconception, and I think it's wrong, that you're only here to do one thing. Of course, purpose is important, but it would not make sense to say, you're here to do that and you're excluded from anything else. So I think in a dimensional sense, in shamanism, shamans are dimensional masters. That's what they do. They just maybe don't call it. Do they call it this way? They don't call it dimensions necessarily, but every attempt in shamanism, specifically with substances, with ceremonies, to go through the veil, to go through the beyond.
Well, shamans talk about the fifth world,
Right.
entering the world of flowers or this hummingbird world. The fifth world, really, for us, we are talking about moving through the fourth dimension, which is time. Time as an illusion doesn't exist. And therefore, we pass through all our illusions of time, and we don't believe in time anymore, and then we can travel very quickly to the fifth dimension, which is pure space.
Right.
And you often talk about how light is not affected by time, but it is affected by space.
Mm-hmm.
So when we pass through space, when we pass through this fourth dimension, we quickly then go through the fifth. And maybe that is really what we are talking about as the fifth world.
Right. I think also it's interesting maybe for you guys to understand how we see dimensions or how we experience dimensions. Now, I'm not a healer by choice. It's just not what I do. But Foster is always in some dimensional shift, you see. So when I do a reading, and this is people, and again, it's not something I learned, it's something that I accepted as how seeing energy presented itself to me. And again, I always say, and I always remind people, I've never ever seen a really bad reading.
No.
Really, never. It would not be in the nature of spirituality or in spirit to look at something from a judgmental point or to say, you're here to become a murderer. I've never seen that, for example. I've never seen a chart or a contract that says, I'm going to go and, bomb people out of their skyscrapers. I've never seen any of that.
Also,
Right.
a healer only sees the best in people.
I think
We're
that
always
is
optimistic.
I think that is a fundamental thing that we share since we met each other. Is we are relentless, disgustingly positive and cheerful, and all the time. We just don't have the time and the nerve, I think, and the also we just don't accept sometimes this reality that people create, that life is bad. A bad day is not a bad life. Okay, you can have a bad day. It doesn't make your life bad. But I know people who, my God, it's like a monologue. They go through what they went through, and then they talk about how they feel better. And this is just a huge amount of time. No one cares. My mother used to say, "Cry and the world will weep with." No, what was it?
Cry and the world will
Laugh
weep with-
and the world will laugh with you. Cry and you will weep alone. She was right. She was really right. But the idea is also to understand that dimensions are concepts that are variations of where we are at this point. We exist as one original. That's one Foster, that's one Christoph, that's one you. Okay? But I
Many
think
copies.
I think that what the universe does is it made copies of itself. This is just one universe of many universes. And this is just one experience of many experiences. I do support very much the understanding that the soul is asleep, dreaming of our reality.
Yes.
You see, and so that when the soul wakes up from her dream, is that we die. And we return back and say, that was the weirdest crap I've ever seen in a dream, until we realize we actually lived it. You know, it's like, when you wake up sometimes and dreamt the most absurd things, and think, what the hell was I thinking, dreaming that? I think I do support this, because we are spirits with a physical experience, not the other way around. Okay? So we are by nature spiritual, and by nature interdimensionally connected. And that's, I think, what we describe sometimes also as an awakening. An awakening is not, something fell on your head and suddenly you had an epiphany, or a trauma or an illness got you there. I think that by going through I call them the invisible dimensional experiences or vibrations, we achieve a level of awareness of some sort. I describe it also with a passing state, when life changes from one day to another, right? When something really interesting happens, traumatic happens, also very happy happens, that is a shift from one dimensional reality to another dimensional reality. We don't wake up in the same dimension as we go to sleep, right? We're changing dimensions according to our vibrational match, so to speak.
And literally, there was a day when I was just kind of a regular guy who was studying, and the next day I was completely open, and I knew things. So I woke up in a different dimensional reality.
But in your case also, it was initiated by a lightning, which hit him.
Which is enlightenment.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, a couple times, which is so upsetting, because I know that the rareness of being hit by lightning is more than winning the lottery. So I always wonder, why can't you win the lottery more? But he's being hit by lightning, which is, I'm fine with it.
But for me, it was an awakening moment.
That is an awakening moment. This is
from one day to the next.
Exactly.
Literally.
And that is an obvious sign, right? Like a traumatic experience can be, or is very often an initiator, that you're here and the next moment you're there.
Yes.
To some degree, by the way, every accident is a dimensional shift. Accidents happen when we don't want to move, and we're bumping into each other, we're crashing into each other, or we're over driving ourselves sometimes, and then something has to happen in order to get from one place to another place.
Sometimes it's to get your attention. If there's an illness brewing in your body, a tremendous unhappiness, or a cancer, usually we'll have some sort of accident or something in which it will make you have to go to the doctor in order to find out what's really going on in your body.
Right. There's this famous story where a man went for skiing. He fell, broke his leg. They stitched him up, sent him home. Then he had issues, so he went back. And just because of that little examination of his pain, they discovered that he had cancer.
Right.
See, the body really gives you messages, really tells you something is about to happen. And I'm telling you this, in my experience, spiritual and non-spiritual people alike had that. They said, I always had some feeling that something would happen. And this is for us, or for me specifically, a dimensional shift, which happens naturally, according to vibration, according to plan, according to, let's call it karma if you want, because you like that word so much. Thank you for watching our last episode. Please keep watching and keep listening to us. But it's not the only way to shift a dimension. You can also do it by deliberate intent.
Yes. And sometimes I'm working on somebody and I will feel I have to shake them out of their reality. So I start shaking them, or I do something, and then they say, oh, I feel terrible, something's happening. And then later on they go to a hospital, or they go somewhere, they think they have a concussion or whatever, but then they find out there's a much more serious illness. Right. And if this hadn't happened, they would not have gotten the help. Right. That's outside of time.
That's what healers often do, isn't it? Translate something much more deeper. And therefore, also in spirituality in general, when people heal their vibration, become more aligned with their contract and with their purpose, usually the next thing is that life falls apart. And
or people come bloody to your door. This happened to me when I was much younger. and you have to stop the bleeding so they can get to the hospital.
Mm.
And then you put your hand on there and you do your pranic breathing, you do your healing work. And, sometimes people have spontaneous healings.
Mm.
That also happens.
Mhm.
That's outside of time.
But what is that?
You're shifting the dimension.
Exactly. This spontaneous or miraculous means that through faith, through a form of surrender almost
Yes.
to your faith and your belief, it doesn't matter what it is, it shifts the dimension so much that you have suddenly a miraculous outcome. But that miracle is a shift into the best possible dimensional experience.
Like many people come in wheelchairs and they expect to be able to walk, and then my guide says, no, this is their lesson. They have chosen this, and please don't take them out. Don't help them to walk.
Right.
So you don't, but you uplift them. But you are there for them. There you help them through. It's like carrying their hand.
Mm-hmm.
Well, some other people, you have to say, they have certain challenges in their lives and they don't need them.
Right.
And so when you're doing healing work, there's a spontaneous moment, like a spiritual science, in which you go into what we say in the heart. You go through a Fibonacci series in your heart.
Mm-hmm.
You go into healing and you project something in the body, and the healing comes through you and the person has a complete remission.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctors can't find cancer within 24 hours. There's no cancer.
Right.
That has happened many times. Now,
Let's talk about
that's a dimensional
let's
shift.
talk about dimensions, because people say it's so difficult, or our students, of course, they say it's so difficult to understand how we can exist in various forms. And first of all, who put you into these various forms? You did. You did. Don't you have this daydreaming experience, or the meditative experience, or you all read The Secret that says just visualize on something, focus long enough on it. This focusing, this dreaming up, that fake it till you make it concept, right? This projection of a dream, visualizing something, projecting something, in any shape or form, creates a duplicate of you in a different dimensional experience. For the universe, it doesn't matter if it's real or not. That's what we all say. The brain doesn't care if it's real or not. When I say now, imagine now, or tell yourself, I'm going to bite now into a fat, juicy, yellow, ripe lemon, and it's going to spritz, and it's going to squeeze, and it's going to already, even I'm salivating. You see, lemon anywhere? No, there's no lemon. But the brain just takes it for granted. And I think that every thought, idea, and every thought that especially has a vision, an outcome that you can visualize, and an emotion, if you can almost smell the flowers, touch the person, feel the joy, hear the message, that is creating a dimensional shift. And basically, you're in this one, in A, and you want to get into B. And so the dreaming up, the projection, the manifestation is nothing but setting up a path from A to B, and your practice should get you from your place to that place. You see, we call this achieving something, but really the achievement is entering the dimensional shift of what you want. So it's not that we're becoming successful here. We're already, hopefully, are successful according to a dream there, you see. And then we have a million daydreams, or more or less, but these are not just dreams, not just projections, not just ideas or visualizations or meditations. They are actual fabricated creational dimensions that would be great to enter.
Then there are portals, and sometimes you find a portal to another earth. So this is not the only earth. And when you go into that portal, that's quite extraordinary. There are portals to other dimensions. So if you stop believing in time, it's much more easy to go through portals. I meet Native Americans who know where a portal is, and they go there and they walk into the portal and they're in another dimension.
Right.
And then there is the idea of waking up inside of your dreams and having a lucid dream, in which you can then start to journey outside. You may go into your astral body, you may be out of your body, and you're floating above it, and then you go to the astral world, and you have to go through that quickly because you don't want to be in a lower astral, you want to go into a higher astral. And as you go to the higher astral, you meet people and they have red eyes, and then you know that's another person, another dreamer.
Right.
That's not a part of you anymore.
Right.
That you're meeting somebody else. And then you keep going to, you can start learning slowly, how to train yourself to go to
Right.
other worlds and other planets.
So basically, we're talking a little bit a variation of astral travel, which again, closing your eyes and meditating and projecting yourself into a different realm
Yeah, a
is
different
not
realm.
astral travel.
No.
Astral travel is a misconception or a word that is mistruth because it is really mental travel. You travel with a mental body. And so it is a whole procedure. We have a lot of work for this already recorded, and we're teaching it in our workshops. If that's something that you're interested in, please check our website always from time to time, especially now with the cold times. We're offering some workshops, also Zooms, by the way, which is so much nicer because we're all sitting in pajamas, projecting ourselves, which is great. But it is a technical process. It's not just close your eyes and you're somewhere. It's a real technique.
Yes.
Which you can not only travel into an alternative reality, but you can also create it,
Yes.
manifest it. Yeah, because we are in a creational universe. We're
Yeah.
meant to create, we're meant to desire, we're meant to want.
Then there's the reality that we're not all here. So the soul projects the spirit here. And then, Christos, then there's you who did something quite astonishing. You had an incarnation way back when I met you, in which you brought all of yourself into one incarnation. Well, I've never truly ever done that. I've brought parts of my bigger self, my large self here, but never the whole thing, which can be quite dangerous also to do. You have to be quite adept to do that.
I always say, and without sounding like something great, it is part of a mission. When a mission is quite intense, and mine is, it just is.
You brought all of yourself.
I brought a great deal of my true self together, yes.
Which then allowed you to do quite a lot of other things, quite a lot of fantastical things.
The more complete yourself is, the more access you have to dimensional experiences. We call this miracles, we call this enlightened people, so I'm not the only one, trust me. You're not far away from that. But again, it has to do with a specific understanding of being able to understand technicalities of how energies work so that others who don't have it can experience it as well. And that is the goal. Why we're doing why we're talking about dimensions.
Well, you can also work on a specific area, like your character or something. So you don't bring all of yourself here. You bring that particular element that will need learning, certain lessons,
but you see,
certain development.
I believe it's like this. And in my experience, the way when I look at readings, this is what it works. I look at you as a person, right? In your current reality. But I look also at the variations of your character. And some of these parts, as you say, we don't incarnate with them, we don't bring them in, but they are present.
They're present.
They are present. They're witnessing you. They're watching you. There's a sign. You see, we're getting a phone call. So we're going to ignore it for now. You hear nothing. It's angel bells, whatever. Welcome to the modern world. But I think that all these aspects are incarnating with you. They're all coming together, and they don't have to be active. They don't have to be active. And according to how your contract goes, how your free will and your free choice manifests, some of these aspects find a way in.
And some people consider that soul retrieval.
That's the closest concept, because we don't have that in my tradition. We don't have a term for it. But a soul retrieval is literally the ability to not only bring in all parts of yourself, and so being in the most awake state or aware state. But again, you have to be the problem is to be aware of the shadow parts, which I'm very much aware. I always tell people, don't play with me. I can become quite dark when people provoke me, or quite sometimes I feel dangerous, but it takes a lot to get me to that point. But it's not naturally for me, but it is also a part of your nature.
The fruitful darkness.
Exactly, you see. But again, it's a choice if I want to react on it or not. But I see people, and that's why when we look at somebody like Hitler, for example, horrible person, of course, this is a soul who incarnates with a contract. I want to change the world, for example, right? Or God knows what. And I'm sure that all his aspects were available. And something happens, and this dark element comes in because he did all the right things. He was a vegetarian, right? Let's call it right. He loved animals. He did yoga. He messed with Buddhism. He had all these Tibetan black magicians around. He was obsessed with occultism. I mean, he had the substance of spirit on his fingertips. But I think the moment, whatever shifted him to where he became what he was, this darkness comes in. And that is, I think, also greed. That is also arrogance. That is also
definitely arrogance.
And this is
coldness.
This is what I believe happened,
Yeah.
because people ask me about it. What is happening with somebody like this on a scale like this? I mean, we have now very current people like that, and this is, I think, what happened. I think what happened is that he was somebody who, interested in spirituality, tried with all means to bring in all his aspects. He wanted to be godlike.
Yes.
I really believe this. So he calls in.
Magic.
So he has also documented these Tibetans around him who somehow initiate him or show him what's possible. Tibetan magic exists, and it's nothing funny about it. There's really a dangerous, they have black magic like white magic, if you like these terms, black and white, but they knew
The intention.
Absolutely, right? And I think what happened is they got it all together, but they didn't filter, or they didn't, he was not ready, I think, to control also the dark part. And that dark part, I mean, the man is possessed by darkness, obviously, nuts, crazy, you see. But you see, again, in my system and in my understanding, everybody comes with a very positive element, a very lightful element. But all these aspects are there. And whatever we experience, we let something, and that can be another person, right? I knew people, we even always say this, we knew people, wonderful, great, loving. Then they meet somebody, they fall in love, it's a complete asshole, and they just turn into these abusive, out of control people. That is also a form of dimensionally shifting somebody. How do you shift? You leave your space and you shift into that man's or that woman's place. You become like them, and by that you're being tainted, you're being taken in, so to speak. That's why we say people can make you sick, but it's a little bit more than that. So I'm trying to explain the technicality the way I've seen it, you see?
Well, then there's entities. When an entity comes into you, and I mean, Hitler or lots of people, I know Mao Zedong, lots of people start to bring in a shadow element, an entity that then kind of takes over their personality.
Right.
And it becomes usually quite cruel and violent, and we've seen that throughout history.
Yeah.
But that was also latent inside of every human being. We all have that. We keep things under control, like a round table, in a sense, like Arthur. You have, or Guinevere, you have around your table all the different sub-personalities.
Right.
And in your shadow work, you must engage all of them and keep them in balance with each other. So you have to know yourself.
Right.
And most of all, know your shadows.
Right.
Parents' shadows. A man always
In
has
shamanism,
to
very,
separate
very
from
important.
his
Yes.
father's shadow.
Yes.
Because you are doomed to live out your father's shadow if you don't know what it is.
Right.
So you identify your father's shadow, then you have to make a boundary between you and your father's shadow, and then you have to see it in yourself, and then you have to face it. Yeah. That's quite a thing. Like facing a mad woman, if you have madness in your family. So you have to sit opposite the table and look in her eyes. So there are many techniques to work with your shadow. I mean, there are different kinds of shadows that we face, and you have to identify them. The one that wants to dominate everything, the one that wants to be a victim. There are lots of shadows.
But what we're saying is that these shadows are projections of your personality.
Absolutely.
That exist. That means there is somewhere a really disgusting, cruel aspect of yourself. And there's somewhere a very positive, loving aspect of yourself. and you're here basically a vessel that says, I wonder which part I prefer. You see, you
Make
can't
a
have,
choice,
because you
yes.
cannot have both extremes in your system. The
They
goal
color
is,
what you do, yes.
exactly. The goal is to call it all in and be completely responsible and completely in charge over that. And very nice, by the way, a really great concept about dimensions and how we experience them. You find in the tarot as it is depicted or connected to the tree of life, which I teach in Kabbalah, for example, or in many techniques. And every tarot card is a dimensional shift.
It's a doorway.
It's absolutely a doorway, a gate, a portal. It's all about shifting, but these shifts happen beyond time and space.
And this
You know,
is
they-
because there are 34 lessons in a life.
Right.
And a Kabbalah is all about organizing those lessons. So all the different pathways between the Sephiras are actually the life lessons.
Right.
They're also the main stories and fairy tales.
Absolutely.
So each story teaches you something about what you will experience on Earth and how to, in essence, master yourself or overcome obstacles and embrace other parts
Well,
of
we
yourself.
have, by the way, because he's talking about storytelling, which is the way, you know, Shakespeare, in the Middle Ages or in that time, who would tell a story by play, and people would be mesmerized by it. Now we're just watching Netflix, you see, and watching a show or watching a movie is
Storytelling.
a storytelling, which is a dimensional shift, especially when we see that the dimensional shift can have a real impact in our society. Like I remember when Black Panther came out, right? And it was right before Black Lives Matter, and it just shifted a great deal to an audience who just went, no matter what the color, and went and said, you know what, it's really true, we have to fight for our ideals. The same happened now, by the way. I wanted to show you this.
Avatar was a shift into shamanism
totally.
for many people,
Absolutely.
or Dances with Wolves. There were different movies that start to bring in
Right.
Native American ideas into the general culture, and to face also our own genocidal tendencies.
Yeah.
Are the murder of African Americans, the murder of Native Americans, the genocide of different races, you know,
Right.
whether it's, you know, they're all over the world. There are various cultures that have been
Right.
trying to get obliterated. And in this genocides, when we face it inside of ourselves, it's quite a healing. You know, I go to Germany and I'm always trying to heal things there in the land, things that have happened at certain places. Because it's an imprint. So all of us come to a transformation in ourselves. And then we change inside, there's a shifted dimension, and then you're outside of that. You're no longer mourning it, you're no longer in the pain of the genocide. You have learned strength, or you've learned greatness of character, or you've learned to
Responsibility.
or
Yes.
or just to change
Yeah.
things.
I wanted to add to this because right now I'm watching because of dimensional shifts which can happen through social media, which can happen through,
They're happening.
absolutely that's what's happening. Why I love social media, I love this TikTok, right, and these Instagrammers who there is an audience and there is a pool of creators who made it their goal to contribute to a form of empowerment, to a form of sharing through empowerment, and that's people I personally never saw so dominant. There are people with deformities, there are people who suffer from physical illness, there are people who would
Yes.
never have a platform, and here they are giving makeup tips, you know what I mean? And there are people of all sizes, all shapes, all heights.
Paralympics, everything.
You meet people who are underrepresented in the dimensional awareness that we share, you see, and suddenly they are on their own little page, on their little TikTok, and they say, this is what I'm about. This is about gays, lesbians, Christians. You know, there are some wonderful born again pages, by the way. Though I don't agree with almost anything they do, but the way they present themselves is in a very loving way, and they try also to invite you into their world and to the understanding. We have to be open for everybody, We don't have to agree.
No.
And probably, you know,
We respect each other, but we don't.
and I think respecting is so important. But I think also when I look at certain people and ideas and how they project and try to dominate a dimension. I think that is the problem.
Well-
We know the answer, and so you all have to follow.
Well, I don't believe in preaching. I don't
Right.
believe that you ever have to preach anything that you believe to somebody else
Right.
and try to convert them.
Right.
I don't believe in any kind of dogma.
Right.
Really. I understand traditions, and I understand if you do it this way, you will have this result.
Right.
That's a tradition.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's really great, isn't it? When we see, I always show you this, and I
we
always
are changing a lot
I
of that, though.
always annoy him with, look at this in the morning. Look at this. So I said, look, even if I don't agree with it, it's exactly what Foster says. These are people who don't preach. They don't try to convert me that something's
Never.
wrong with me. They say, can I contribute through my perspective to the greater good? And I don't care where you come from. If you do it in such a way, it contributes to a larger dimensional shift. And I think that we are in the middle because social media has become an interconnected network in which every idea, it doesn't matter if we agree with it, but contributes to a larger view of what is going on in this world. Even if I don't agree with 4 million people who think the earth is flat, but it's their dimensional experience that says maybe something like this is possible, or for me,
Well, I was in a meditation once where we are traveling through the planets. I actually wrote the script for it to go to the Pleiades, Sirius, and whatever happened in that script, I started to have Kundalini when we were actually in the meditation. So that's a dimensional shift. But I'm in my body going through
Right.
it. Then I wanted to go through a near-death experience in shamanism where I was buried alive, all these practices that we do. But in that practice where I died, I went through a samadhi experience, which is something in India, which is it's very, very hard to describe, but you are basically dead, but you're in another dimension. And you can exist there, and you bring quite a lot back with you.
Yeah.
When you come out of it and you decide, okay, I can live on multiple realities.
It's so interesting that you
multiple
say
levels.
that. It's so interesting that you say that because the first exercise when I went into my growing into being a student, my first spiritual exercise was, of all things I could have done, was I needed to create, or I was asked to create a space in case I die. And they said, we want you to go through this process, which was given, and described, and we had to follow it mentally. And then I realized I'm on the other side. And there I built a home, and I built an image and a concept. And it had to be created in a very specific way. And then we came out of it, and I said, what was the point of this? I mean, I'm like 11. Why do I need to think about my death? And my teacher said, because it can happen at any time. And second, we want to make sure that you know that you are dead because you're creating something that only you know and you can identify. And that was my first introduction into dimensional shifting. Now, when we do dimensional shifts, by the way, and I see this energetically, so when Foster works on people, that is basically 10 hours of sometimes 14 hours a day of dimensional shifting. And the way I see it is by shifting and changing of colors.
Absolutely.
That's how I see it. So I know that a color shift, like an aura, for example, you're carrying your own portal with you. You see, you don't need to go through a portal. You are a portal. You have 7 portals who all interact with each other. You see, and so when I do a ritual, for example, or when I invoke something, a ceremony,
medicine wheel.
there is a shift in color, and then I know that the shift of color will indicate the directive where I should look in. So if the color is very blue, then I look into communication. When the color is very red, then I look into physical activity. When the color is very purple, for example, or lilac, then I look into spiritual processes. So it gives you the outcome of the dimensional shift, tells you already in what kind of subject or field you should look.
Also, when you're working on somebody, you're lending your own energy and experience
Absolutely,
to them.
yes.
You're touching them. And then on top of that, there is your connection to the other side that automatically reconnects them and shifts them, even if it's a soul retrieval or it's a healing, whatever. Now, when you go through these shifts in a healing, and somebody's completely different, I always imagine them clear. I also take out all the negativity in the body so they experience what that could be like. I like to take out certain thought forms that they have, phantoms that they created over their life, just to have a moment before they recreate them again.
Right.
Just to see the difference. That's a dimensional shift, certainly. Where you are also combusting all the negative inside of their body. You can enlighten it, you know?
And then, there is the crossroad shift.
Which we love. That's
The crossroad shift is, for example, very simple. No, without any kind of spiritual connotation, a crossroad shift is a moment when you get a diagnosis, for example. You know, you get your test, you go to a doctor, they give you the diagnosis, the result, and say you have a certain illness or you're suffering from something, and that is the outcome.
Between life and death.
That puts you into a crossroad shift point, which means either you succumb to it or you say, I will make sure that no one is more right than me. You see, and when you say I'm blessed and protected, that is an important mantra, I think, as simple as it is. I was just reminded of it because it's so simple and so cute. You know, we don't pay attention to it, but it's very powerful. I'm blessed and protected. And shout out to Elizabeth, who repeated it in a session, and said, why don't I remember these things? Because they're so simple, but very, very effective.
Blessed and protected.
Absolutely, I'm blessed and protected.
It's a mantra. Yeah.
But that also, or when a partner comes and says out of the blue, I want a divorce. Or when you get fired from a job. It's a wake-up call. But we call it also a crossroad dimensional shift. Because now it's up to you. If you succumb to it and you feel beaten down and you have to go into the dimensional experience of that, or you say, I will prove pretty much everybody wrong because there is a different path, and that different path can be a very enlightening and very empowering, where no one else is right except you. Just late in our last workshop, guides came through so wonderfully and said, you should never let somebody choose the feeling for you. Never let anybody make a decision of how you should feel about yourself. And so respecting yourself, healing yourself, having some dignity, having some self-respect is really important for dimensional experiences, because we do want the better experiences. We do want to wake up in the better outcomes, you know, which are all set up, by the way.
I had an experience in Italy of a dimensional shift that was quite important for me. And the people in the car. There were 3 of us in a car. We were driving to do the medicine wheel. And whenever we're teaching the medicine wheel on a large scale, and there's usually, you know, lots of people coming, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 or more. And as we're getting to teach the medicine wheel, everywhere across the roads starts rainbows. So you have a rainbow across the road, you have a rainbow with a car, you have sometimes 7 rainbows over a city when you're going to teach the medicine wheel. So we were going to teach it, we were on the way there, and for a moment, the light changed, everything changed. And one woman went to go to the bathroom, you know, we're at some truck stop, really. And she went to the bathroom, and the 2 of us were there, and a magpie, the shaman bird, comes right up to the car and goes right up to my foot. So I'm looking at this magpie, I'm thinking about the magpie, and we're in a dimensional shift, and a bus comes full of virginal nuns. I mean, we're talking 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old nuns, but all of them looking like models, incredibly gorgeous, all of them, you know, looking at us and smiling and coming off the bus. So the bus is full of light. They're coming out one by one, staring at us in the car. There's a magpie over here, and there's rainbows everywhere, physical rainbows. And you are thinking, I'm in a dimensional shift moment. I even said to Antonella, this is a dimensional shift. We're in a portal right now.
Right.
We're in between dimensions right now. We've been lifted. And you can feel it. And, you know, then the woman came back from the bathroom and we drove to the workshop. And there were even rainbows and circles in the air. It was unbelievable. But, you know, because of the intention of the people, everybody going to do a medicine wheel work. Yeah. Everybody balancing themselves. It created a joy in the earth, something, and the dimensional shift elevated us to another reality.
In other words, we call dimensional shift synchronicities. I think when you want to know if you're in a dimensional shift, look at these synchronicities, look at things that come together. It was once when I was teaching in Italy as well, in this wonderful room, in this wonderful place, and I was teaching about Kabbalah, something like this, in a very high advanced Kabbalah, and a process I developed. And I was thinking, I don't know how I'm going to teach these people this, because it's so, I don't want to say advanced, but it's kind of complex. And of all things that could have happened, this bird flew in the room, circled a couple of times, and flew out through another window. Now, it would have happened probably anyway, but it happened in synchronized, dimensional, spiritual, energetic alignment, so that a messenger from above, we looked all up, and it was during a meditation, so I said to everybody, even you're meditating, open your eyes and look up, and everybody saw a messenger from all the things that could happen. And these are important aspects. So when you look into your life, your everyday life, and you see strange dimensional shifts happening through synchronizations.
Well, sometimes
Then
you
you
do
know.
a ritual, and then you disappear in the ritual in which Christos is invisible, and he has shifted actually into another dimension after he invokes, and the ritual is undergone right then. He is in the middle of a ritual. He's doing whatever he's doing within a whole invocation series. He becomes invisible, and other beings are walking around. So you can see them. They are spirits. They are walking around,
Extending the dimensions.
extending the dimensions, and sometimes somebody actually comes that has lived on Earth and introduces herself, like an old witch or somebody from a tradition who's a master teacher, who comes to these particular moments when you're shifting dimension, because that's what they love. They love rituals. They help conduct the energies. They make sure it all opens correctly, and you're protected. And
which brings us to an important concept, and this is difficult to understand because we're living so much by it. Time is an illusion. Time is really an illusion. I read that we are the only species in the universe that manage to measure time, something that doesn't exist actually. But here we are measuring it. And it makes so much sense, isn't it? Because we have so many experiences of workshops, of rituals, of ceremonies where we lost time, even driving from a certain place to another. And I said to Foster, do you realize that we lost 8 minutes, that the clock stopped and then continued, that we should have been much further, or we just, the next 10 miles are coming.
Always when we're near a town called Greenwich.
It's pretty interesting, It's all that Montauk area, by the way. If you don't know what that means, Google Montauk and Philadelphia experiment and all that stuff. But I'm telling you, we had quite a few of those experiments. You had an interesting dimensional shift where you were driving with a lady and you ended up on the opposite street.
Benthoff, yes.
Right,
And
it's a famous story that
we were on the opposite side of the street. One time I was driving with a shaman, and we were driving, and there was a truck coming at us, and basically we were going to hit the truck because the shaman was driving in the wrong side of the street. He said, "Oh, don't worry." And there we were, really 5 seconds later, we were in front of the car in front of us. How did he get there?
I think the story that you were telling, which is quite, I think you mentioned it a couple of times,
I did.
Is that I think the dimensional shift happens especially when people talk about spirituality.
They do.
We talk about dimensions, we talk about spirit, we talk about emotions, we talk about healing, and something happens to the atmosphere around us. I really think, and I've had it so many times as well, talking with a group of people, and suddenly some kind of shift would happen, some kind of
and sometimes you're in a clear state of mind. You just talk to everybody, and you know everything about their family and everything about them, and you just say it. That's also a kind of your shifted dimension. The whole room got up.
That is a tuning into the dimension of that other person. But that is again skill and craft and practice.
That has happened many times.
Absolutely. So we want you to understand in this podcast how we perceive dimensions, that it's not just some third and fourth and fifth dimension and we're flying up and we turn into ETs. It's not only like that,
But that has happened too.
That has happened too. But the idea is really that when you go to a ceremony and it is induced, I'm morally not opposed to any drugs or something. I just don't take them. I've never been high in my life. I don't need more to be high. Trust me on this. But the idea is that when people say, I saw this and I saw that, and it is very, very abstract sometimes what they see, right? It is always a reflection of their subconscious dimensional experience. You see what there is dimensionally as well. The thing is, whatever consciousness you open your dimension with, you invite this dimension into your life. So you have to be really careful with negative dimensions because you pay attention to it. You paying attention, nurturing through attention means you invite them in. So you have to be careful what you invite in.
And because a medicine wheel is like a crossroad, then we only taught the crossroad ritual. So we went to a crossroad where two roads intersect and they continue to go. And then we would offer, something to the crossroad spirit, and we would invoke Hecate, because she's the guardian of the crossroads. Or in other traditions, you have Papa Legba, you have Alegua, you have, some people like to do saints like Saint Peter, whatever. You call the crossroad spirit, and the crossroad spirit will come, and you give some coins. We buried things in the ground, and we gave offerings of coins and sometimes whiskey, whatever. And one time we did it with all the invocations, and of course this black man showed up. He just starts walking, and he was carrying around a vacuum cleaner, which was quite funny, so that we weren't afraid of him in the middle of a crossroad in the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night. It was, and I remember this very vividly because I made them all late dinner sandwiches in the middle of the night, and
There was a few of us, yeah.
Right, and a few of us, we were like a 15 people group, and they go there, and he comes back and says, "You will not believe it. We did a little ritual, and out of nowhere, this black man comes with a vacuum cleaner. Now you're in a dimensional shift because from all the things. He schleps through the night in the middle of a street, in nowhere, a vacuum cleaner.
And he's pushing it along, so it's making a lot of noise. And when he gets to the place where exactly we buried our things, he looks down, sees it, looks back at us and smiles, and then goes off, and then he disappears. So that is a guardian of the crossroad. That's probably Papa Legba.
And we're talking about physically, not just...
Physically.
Everybody no one was high, no one was anything. This is a real thing. Here you have literally an intersection of dimensional experiences, you see.
Well, many times we called Hecate, and you just can't see anything in the room anymore. You're in a void, a beautiful void. With Hecate, there's no time, there's no space even.
We went to Hawaii and did a ritual inside the crater of a extinguished volcano. Let's get real here.
In Maui, yes.
In Maui, right.
Haleakala.
And we finally made it down there. It was so exhausting. We made a circle, and I call on Hecate. Hecate always shows up to me as wind.
Whirlwinds.
A breeze or a wind or a movement in the air. It doesn't matter if it's a room or outside. And if it's totally still, and right there with our 30 people begins a
whirlwind.
A whirlwind, like a mini tornado,
storm.
basically, that starts towards us, and it jumps right next to our circle
and goes around us in a circle.
This is when
and dissipates.
This is when our dimension and that dimensional merge for a certain degree. On an astronomic level, is when astronomy says that galaxies move, of course, and at some point they will merge at some point. You see, and I think these merging happen on dimensional levels as well.
Well, there was a moment, I was quite young, 24 years old, and I felt the presence of, we call them angels, but they're really, to me they were quite familiar. They were blobs of light, whatever. But what happened for me is I was moved up to that level. So I interacted with them and talked to them. Even though I was in New York City in an apartment, I had no memory of being in New York City. I had only a memory of being with these spirits and interacting with them, listening to sounds in the air, like tremendous bells everywhere in the air, and just talking and whatever. And then I came back into my apartment in New York. And another time I was with Gita Hofer. We were in her apartment in Manhattan, and there's something about that building, whatever. We were doing hermetic experiments. We were reading from a book on hermetics. And all of a sudden, whenever we read from the book, our voices would start to echo. But really, quite a strong echo. There is no echo in her apartment. We've talked many times, there's no echo. But now everything had a reverberation. Every word in the Kabbalion. which we were studying at that time.
Yeah.
And she's there, and I'm there, and the whole place all of a sudden got filled with sound. And then later on, she threw a goodbye party. I was leaving New York. And I don't know how many people came, like 1,000 people came to this party. And we all did overtone singing. We sang in, really beautiful overtones. And again, that reverberation went everywhere in the apartment.
Mm-hmm.
So that shifted our reality into another dimension of sound with hermetics when we were talking about the universal laws in the Kabbalion. And all of a sudden we felt them going through our body as if this is an important moment, we should pay attention, and the law of vibration is making itself quite clear.
Absolutely. I think in the end, all experiences are dimensional experiences, beyond time, also beyond space for me, but they are really opportunities to become more aware, to become more conscious, to become more empowered. I don't think that situations like these leave you, untouched to some degree. And I like the idea, we were just talking to somebody this morning about when is somebody spiritually valid. I think it's when it moves you. You have to be moved. We cannot just love things because, some traditions say you have to love, but sometimes it's really hard to love, but we're trying. It's impossible. I think true love and true healing and true spirit is something that moves you. It shifts you from one state to another. And that's why I think being in a place where we consciously, and that's something that we want to advise as we want you to play with it a little bit as an experiment, to invoke different dimensional selves. Bring them in. Of course, you're not going to say I want
soul retrieval.
Absolutely. Of course, if you're stupid, you're going to say I want the most negative side of me, but then you deserve your misery. We both know some people will do it, so bless their hearts. But the thing is this: before you go to bed and when you lie down, just make a declaration and say, I intend to wake up in the best, most successful or most healthiest dimensional experience or timeline reality, because that's what it is. And when you wake up, you say, I am awake in this best possible dimensional timeline reality. And so play with the words. There's no right or wrong. Play with the words, but you make an intention. And in that intention, you say, I want to experience myself and invoke it, summon it into this timeline, something that exists already. That is like buying a piece of jewelry that belonged to a successful person and you're wearing that ring. It's a successful dimension that you buy and borrow, or you borrow and you wear it. So you have two dimensions together, so to speak.
And we've done it in different ways. Like I did 40 days just inviting in the most healthy dimensional experience for healing. Then I did 40 days of the most prosperous and abundant so that wealth could come. And then I did it specifically for a higher dimensional reality. I want to go into an understanding of ascension.
Yeah.
Then comes the idea of, what if the world has already been destroyed? There is that theory. Yeah. And in that destruction, people at that time played with time. And time traveled in such a way that they could change that outcome.
Right.
Because everything was destroyed here.
Well, time travel is scientific dimensional shifting. That's because now it's a science. It can be physically done.
Because I've been with many shamans even since the beginning. Especially after 2000, I would have to say, in 2012. Shamans were coming to me saying, I think there's a ripple in time. I think there is certainly a fold in time. Is it from, and they asked me, is it from the Philadelphia experiment? Is it from the Montauk experiment? Is it from Crowley's, rituals that he did in New York or in the ones that was done in Los Angeles? Were any of these things affecting it? Yes, they're all affecting it. I think Aleister Crowley certainly opened up a portal. He opened up a dimension very important ritual. He did it on the East Coast, certainly, in New York City, and also he did another one out in Long Island. He did another ritual in
We're talking about Aleister Crowley.
Aleister Crowley.
Right.
And these rituals opened portals that started
Yes.
the awakening, the Beat Generation,
Yes.
and this rebellion, and then came, rock and roll and everything. This is the dimensions he was opening.
Yeah.
That's the kind of person he was.
Yeah.
And he never closed it.
Yeah.
So it's still open.
They're still open and they're still evolving.
They're still evolving.
Absolutely.
Um,
That's also when we look how quick in our time, in this timeline, we evolved from technology
Absolutely.
to,
It's
we went to the Apple store today, I couldn't believe what exists, and considering that what you buy now as brand new has been developed now for the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years sometimes, it's already old crap, but it is amazing how advanced technologically in medicine, in many areas, a lot of things almost sped by, you see. Light does not respond to time.
No.
We made a jump. Basically in, how can I say this? Light just sped through what should have taken much more time. And suddenly, even the last 50 years, I'm 54 now, when I look at the last 50 years, I don't even recognize my childhood anymore. We look at things almost in an archaic way. But this is a dimensional shift where I'd say light is the carrier of dimensional information, any information, and if it's empowered, if it's launched a certain way, it just speeds through our society, and basically it gets faster and faster. This is when time almost becomes obsolete.
And that's the idea of moving into the fourth dimension, when
Right.
time speeds up. Another idea, though, if the world has ended and we are now in its correction, we are in a kind of time loop in which we're allowed to get it right. And if we don't get it right again and again and again, we keep destroying ourselves. We
Right.
keep going through the loop until we get it right.
Right.
And that's the idea of, Groundhog Day and all those other things as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another theory about why we are going through these dimensional changes and why there are more portals starting to open up.
Open up, absolutely.
Everywhere. And certainly there have been people going to sacred sites opening up dimensions.
That's
and
exactly what it
portals.
is. By spiritual travel, we go to Egypt next month. Well, this month again,
Yes.
second time. We went to Greece. We went to all the sacred places. And what is so
Delphi.
interesting, the more people go there, the more they feed, knowingly or not, they feed the portal. They nurture the portal, which is important to keep them up. When you go to a place like Machu Picchu, they don't want you anymore there. It's like tourism. They don't let you meditate anymore. They let you sit anymore. No ceremonies, no nothing. They just say next. Basically, it's like a museum. But when you go there with an open mind and an open spiritual experience and understanding, you feel that there's something so vibrationally important, and they keep it up.
Many dimensions there, yeah.
And even when it's just tourism, Egypt is full of tourists basically, even that attention, that desire to go there and be there for whatever reason, feeds the energy and allows the dimensional portal more and more to open up its old knowledge towards us. And that's when we find more ruins and more graves and more this and more that. Just lately, remember that we saw a documentary about, they found this one bone in some cave where no bone should exist. And now we have to push human evolution into...
It was another part of our evolution.
Right.
Another species, though.
Species, exactly. So again, there is, don't ask me for the name, but there's a very interesting book which I read, and I think it's fascinating. It's called The Mind in the Cave. And it is by an author who basically went through, studied cave paintings. And he said, in a nutshell, look how quick, in what a short period of time, these cave paintings, from very primitive, very, abstract, become very refined. And that we have to rethink the Neanderthal idea, or the primitive human evolved in a much quicker form in that sense. Not
Indian
only,
mind.
so we talk about many minds, of course, but this is a very interesting observation, the cave and the mind. So you might want to look it up.
I'm thinking about different dimensional shifts in our own lives, because there have been many that have really affected us quite strongly.
Well, us meeting was a dimensional shift, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Because we changed each other's life. At least my life definitely was changed. And I think when we meet somebody or we enter a group dynamic in any shape or form, a family, when we give birth, of course, it is definitely a dimensional shift.
And
of
there are
experience.
ways certainly to promote it. I mean, there's different plant substances. I was in Peru and we were experimenting then in Marcahuasi and different places with San Pedro, the cactus. And I had a group who have never seen anything and never really had any experiences. So we wanted to use the cactus to have a dimensional shift, to see spirits. And it was a very high time in Peru. We had just been to Inti Raymi and everything. So we were all meditating. It was quite a large group. We were in a sacred site. And then, quite an old site of the Incas, sacred to them. And then we took the plants. And people came up to me and said, I don't feel anything. An hour has gone, I don't feel anything. Nothing is happening. So I went to a being that was watching our ceremony. It was very large with like very thick, muscular, long, kind of huge upper body and legs. And it was quite larger than us. And it was just sitting there on the rock looking out. So I brought everybody one by one to meet the being. And you could see them all of a sudden shifting, and they could see it. And all of a sudden, they almost had a heart attack, everybody. Oh my God, am I now in a different dimensional reality? Have I finally seen for the first time spirits? Yes. That was the guardian. Whenever you do a ritual like that, there's a guardian invoked. And the guardian was sitting there, looking at it. It was gigantic. It was quite big. And I brought each person in, and you could see their reaction like, I don't see anything, I don't see anything. And then I'd say, now focus on who's there, who's this being? And all of a sudden they would see it. So that was quite a wonderful experience. You understand? And everybody saw the same thing.
Right.
And it's not a mass hypnosis or anything.
No.
That spirit was really there. When I had one of my first openings, I had all these nature spirits around me. I mean, really filling the house. I had never seen nature spirits before. I'd never even seen crystals before. And somebody just came up to me in the street and they said, oh my goodness, you opened. Here's a crystal. What's that? What is a crystal? And then it began, and then you get hundreds of them. And I always went through these shifts where something I didn't have any knowledge of before, all of a sudden I had tremendous knowledge of
right.
the next day.
Right. And that is a good example. Did he receive that knowledge that day? No. The opening of his portal, where the dimensional experience was collected, just merged with his dimension. That's why it went so fast. We call it also a download.
And then after that, you need a book to kind of explain it to you.
Absolutely.
Or you need to meet somebody, or you need to meet a shaman or an Indian.
Let me give you, without going into details, an interesting experience. Many, many years ago, I had a little group of a couple of friends, and we did a little, little Ouija board experiments, little channeling experiments. And of course, at some point, a guide said, do you want to meet an extraterrestrial? And we all looked at each other and said, yeah, sure. So we got instructions and coordinates to go to a certain place. I said, go there at a certain time, certain moment, and wait. So we did, which was funny enough also a place where we went when I experienced my one and only sun eclipse, which was in Germany. So we went there and waited, and there is I will just say, a man. And sitting there
with
on
no
a rock,
chakras.
No chakras, because when I don't see any energy field or no chakras or no aura around somebody, they are not from this planet.
No emotion.
No, well, not emotionally, you
like
see.
We are.
And there was somebody sitting, so of course everybody said, should we go out? Are we getting murdered now? Are we going to get kidnapped and sold into white slavery? I said, I'm going first. So I went there, introduced myself, and I'm telling you guys, there was no chakras, there was no aura, there was just a slight shimmer. The person looked almost artificial. I'm just using these terms very loosely. And we got instructions, and I got a lot answered. A lot is relative, but a lot in that time answered about preparing myself dimensionally. And so one by one, we went there and we talked, and they talked, and we exchanged, but we drove. I remember it was when it was over, it was like a finalization, because we felt also that we were we were climbing a mountain. It was really just a hill, but it
Yeah.
felt incredibly steep. I remember, and
Everybody had the experience.
everybody had the experience. Everybody was there. We drove all back at some point, had a little conversation, and then our group dissolved completely.
Never spoke
We
to
never
each other.
talked to each other again, and so we don't know what he said to all of us. But it was definitely a moment. I never saw these people again, and some that I saw, we never communicated again, and it was a bizarre effect. But it was very interesting. I will not tell you what he said to me, but it was a lot about basically.
Well, what did he say in general?
Well, the general element was that I will witness and contribute to a shift on a global level, and that my presence would help with other presences on this planet to prevent a war.
There you go.
And I got it into such detail that I knew it was real. I mean, it was real, but it came definitely from a being that is not from this dimension. So any kind of, when people say I got abducted by an alien, I have a hard time with this, I have to tell you, because I cannot see the abduction in an aura. So either it happens on such a different energy level that I can't see it, or it's something else. You see, and I try to understand it rather from a dimensional shift, because when they say I've been sucked up and I flew through the roof, this is astral. This is an astral experience. You see, that happens every day. But
Normal for us.
The idea doesn't make sense to me that somebody would fly 5 billion light years through the galaxy, which is, by the way, impossible because the vastness of the universe is so large.
Right.
There is no species that can
Physically
do it. So it's all through dimensions. It's all through dimensions, and they bend space. Wormhole idea. That's what I would say, and I think that a lot happens on an astral level, and that is when they experience a dimensional world that is really foreign to our human understanding. And when we enter a world, let's call it an alien spaceship, that's how our brain interprets it. I think it's really just interpretation for something so foreign, which is not even brand new.
No.
We know from the history, when the conquistadors came with their ships, the indigenous people said, what exactly am I looking at? They couldn't see the ships. They never knew what it is.
Even if after I got hit by lightning, I would always see these strange lightning bolt images on doors. And they would light up, and I would think, who is this person who lives here? And I would knock on the door and meet them. And they always were people who had experiences with extraterrestrials and dimensions. Very fascinating. They all saw the same symbol.
We teach much more about this.
Yes.
We don't want to go overboard with it, but I want to give you a little hint here, that dimensions are colors.
Yes.
And I learned when I had to study, and I told you the story already for so many times. I told you that when I had to study, for example, hermetics, my teacher would put in a purple light bulb, and I had to read and study and memorize in that purple vibration. Other subjects were read in a yellow vibration, or in a gold vibration, in a black vibration. So any kind of dimensional understanding of knowledge is a vibrational equivalent of color, in color. And this is the idea of easier experiencing sometimes a dimension and its content, if you want, what it vibrates in, because a blue color will always be a dimension of knowledge and expansion, or a gold one of transformation and healing, for example. Then there are different colors now, which I haven't seen only in the last couple of years, which is ultramarine, for example, or a color
Orange pink.
or an orange pink, or opalescent, for example. This is not,
Iridescent
it's
colors.
iridescent. Then I know that we are entering here dimensions which are, for my understanding, really foreign. So if you would go there, your mental brain would try to make sense of it. So it just interprets something, and that can be amazing, that can be scary, right? That can be confusing, or in worst case, nothing happens. And I say nothing happens is the worst case. It's better that something happens. But this is something that I teach, that Foster teaches, that we explore nevertheless on a regular basis. We really try to immerse ourselves and find better and easier ways to help you guys experience these things in your own pace, in your own time, in your own energy, and in a safe way. Please let me say.
And then we got trained even in dreams to shift dimensions and explore other worlds through dreams.
But again,
with others.
Again, we want to refer to our videos because during COVID, me and Foster, we sat down and produced literally 50 videos. And there are many videos with themes that could really interest you. So look at our website and you can find access to it. Again, don't download them unless you have a computer the size of Fort Knox, basically, because it's quite large files.
Just stream them.
Stream them, and you have access to them. They will stay there where they are anyway.
It's easy.
And we want to leave you with that concept, and hope that you, when you go to bed later, that you make a choice, that you want to wake up in the best possible, most healthiest, successful, amazing, miraculous, magical, extraordinary, joyful, loving, time-dimensional reality and experience. And do this a couple of days, okay? And then you'll see.
Many days to program it.
To program it, and then things shift.
And one day it shifts. And then the light switch might be on the other side of the
Exactly,
bed.
and
That's an amazing moment.
Absolutely. So that's our New York moment here.
That used to happen to me quite a bit. I would have like a magical wand on one side of my bed, and then all of a sudden it's on the ground in front of me, or I lost something, and things that I lost would be right there next to me when I came back. That's a great thing.
Okay. This was New York, the New York episode.
Yes.
Okay. We will let you go now because we have a show tonight, which is our first date show in a long time. We're going to watch Harry Potter, Wish Us Luck. So we're going to Broadway.
It's Broadway, yeah.
It's Broadway. Can you imagine how tragic? But here we are, two adult people going and watch a musical. We want to wish you all the best. And we love you. And again, thank you so much for sharing, liking, and what's the other one? Sharing, liking, and subscribing. You see, subscribing. Subscribing. Okay, subscribe. Okay. And please remember, in your individual countries, on the videos on YouTube, you can click on settings and you can get somewhat a translation.
Yes, you can.
And it's maybe not perfect, but it's free, so don't complain and love it. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Be well, be safe, and we'll see you in the next dimensional reality. Bye. Bye.